for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Derek Mitchell had built his life on 3 pillars: his successful construction company, his devotion to his 5-year-old daughter Lucy, and what he believed was an unshakable marriage to Tiffany. At 38, Derek was a man who commanded respect through quiet strength rather than loud words. His calloused hand spoke of years climbing from a job site labor to owning Mitchell Construction, one of the most trusted building companies in their mid-sized Colorado town. The Mitchell family lived in a pristine 2-story colonial that Derek had built himself. Every beam, every joint crafted with a precision that made him legendary among local contractors. Neighbors often commented on how picture-perfect they seemed. Derek with his steady demeanor and work ethic, Tiffany with her yoga instructor's grace and community volunteer work, and little Lucy with her infectious laugh that could brighten Derek's darkest days. Derek's background was far from privileged. Raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, he learned early that trust was earned and betrayal was unforgivable. His mother had been destroyed by his father's abandonment, and Derek swore he'd never put his family through such pain. This conviction shaped every decision he made, from working 18-hour days to ensure financial security, to being present for every school play and bedtime story despite his exhaustion. Tiffany, 28, had entered Derek's life 6 years ago at a charity event where she was coordinating volunteers. Her beauty was undeniable: auburn hair, green eyes, and a smile that seemed to promise everything Derek had never dared to hope for. She came from a middle-class family, but had always craved a lifestyle beyond her means. Derek's growing success offered her the security and status she desired, though she was careful never to reveal this motivation. Their courtship was swift, and Derek was completely captivated. Tiffany played the role of devoted partner perfectly, supporting his business ventures and eventually becoming pregnant with Lucy. Derek proposed the day he learned about the pregnancy, overwhelmed with joy at the prospect of the family he'd always wanted. But beneath Tiffany's polished exterior lurked a calculating mind and an insatiable need for excitement. Derek's predictable nature and increasing focus on work left her feeling trapped in a life that appeared perfect but felt suffocating. She began seeking thrills elsewhere, first through expensive shopping sprees funded by Derek's hard-earned money, then through increasingly risky behaviors. The evening before the hospital visit, Derek had returned home from a particularly challenging project, a commercial development that required his personal oversight. He found Tiffany in their bedroom, hastily closing her laptop and smiling too brightly. "How was your day?" she asked, moving to kiss his cheek with an enthusiasm that seemed forced. "Long," Derek replied, loosening his tie. "But the Riverside project is finally on track." "Where's Lucy?" "She's been feeling a bit under the weather. I put her to bed early." Tiffany's voice carried a note Derek couldn't quite identify, something between concern and nervousness. Derek frowned, immediately heading toward Lucy's room. He found his daughter sleeping fitfully, her small face flushed and warm to the touch. "Has she seen a doctor?" "It's just a little bug," Tiffany said quickly, appearing behind him. "I've been monitoring her temperature. These things pass." Derek's protective instincts flared, but he trusted Tiffany's judgment. She was Lucy's mother, after all, and spent more time with her than he did. Still, something nagged at him as he watched his daughter's restless sleep. The next morning brought the rash, angry red welts across Lucy's arms and torso that seemed to have appeared overnight. Derek's calm demeanor cracked as he saw his daughter's discomfort. "We're going to the hospital," he declared, already reaching for his keys. Tiffany hesitated for just a moment, a pause so brief Derek almost missed it. "Maybe we should call her pediatrician first." "Now, Tiffany." Derek's voice carried the steel that made construction workers jump to attention. His daughter's welfare was not up for debate. The drive to Mercy General was tense. Lucy whimpered in her car seat, while Tiffany sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. Derek's mind raced through possibilities: allergic reactions, viral infections, anything that could explain the sudden onset of symptoms. At the hospital, Derek carried Lucy through the emergency room doors, his heart pounding as he approached the reception desk. The nurse took one look at the distressed child and immediately called for a doctor. Dr. Raymond Mills, a veteran pediatrician with 25 years of experience, emerged within minutes. Derek had never met the man, but something about his kind eyes and gentle manner with Lucy immediately put him at ease. "Let's get this little one examined," Dr. Mills said, leading them to a private room. As Derek gently placed Lucy on the examination table, he noticed Dr. Mills' expression change subtly when he looked at Tiffany. The doctor's professional smile seemed to falter for just an instant, replaced by something Derek couldn't quite read. Recognition? Concern? Before Derek could analyze it further, Dr. Mills was focused entirely on Lucy, his hands gentle as he examined the rash. "When did this start?" Dr. Mills asked, his voice carefully neutral. "This morning," Derek replied immediately. "She was warm last night, but the rash just appeared." Dr. Mills glanced at Tiffany, who stood near the door with her arms crossed. "Have there been any changes in diet, new detergents, any medications?" "Nothing," Derek said firmly. "We're very careful about what she's exposed to." The examination continued in relative silence, but Derek began to notice small details that hadn't registered before. Dr. Mills asked Tiffany several pointed questions about Lucy's recent activities, questions that seemed to make his wife increasingly uncomfortable. When the doctor requested a few minutes alone with Lucy to complete some tests, Tiffany was quick to suggest they both wait outside. "Actually," Dr. Mills said carefully, "it would be helpful if one parent could stay. Sometimes children are more comfortable with a familiar presence during procedures." Derek immediately volunteered, but something in Dr. Mills' tone suggested this wasn't optional for Tiffany. "Mrs. Mitchell, there are some forms at the nurse's station that need your attention. Insurance verification and such." After Tiffany reluctantly left, Dr. Mills' entire demeanor shifted. His movements became more deliberate, his examination more thorough. He spoke softly to Lucy, distracting her with gentle questions about her favorite toys, while carefully documenting every mark on her small body. Derek watched, a growing unease settling in his stomach as he observed the doctor's methodical approach. This wasn't a routine examination for a simple rash. Dr. Mills was looking for something specific. 20 minutes later, Dr. Mills completed his examination and called for additional tests. "I want to run some blood work," he explained to Derek, "just to rule out any underlying causes." As they waited for Tiffany to return, Dr. Mills seemed to struggle with an internal decision. He glanced toward the door multiple times before finally speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has Lucy had any similar episodes recently? Any unexplained illnesses or symptoms?" Derek thought carefully. Over the past few months, Lucy had indeed seemed to have more than her share of minor ailments: stomach bugs, headaches, unusual fatigue. Tiffany had always been quick to explain them away, and Derek had attributed them to the normal childhood illnesses that came with starting kindergarten. "There have been a few things," Derek admitted slowly, "but nothing serious. My wife handles most of the day-to-day health issues since I'm at work." Dr. Mills nodded grimly, as if Derek's answer confirmed something he'd suspected. The door opened, and Tiffany returned with the paperwork, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes darting between Derek and the doctor. "How is she?" Tiffany asked, moving to stroke Lucy's hair with a tenderness that seemed almost performative. "We're running some additional tests," Dr. Mills replied carefully. "I'll have the results within an hour." The next hour passed in agonizing slowness. Derek held Lucy's hand while she dozed fitfully, the sedative Dr. Mills had given her for the blood draw, making her sleepy. Tiffany spent most of the time on her phone, claiming she was updating her mother and canceling her afternoon appointments. Derek found himself studying his wife with new eyes. In 5 years of marriage, he'd always seen her as Lucy's devoted mother, perhaps sometimes overly cautious, but never anything other than loving. Now, in the sterile hospital environment, he noticed things that had previously escaped his attention. The way she seemed almost relieved when Lucy was sleeping, The practiced nature of her maternal gestures, the subtle tension that seemed to radiate from her whenever Dr. Mills was present. When Dr. Mills finally returned with the test results, his expression was carefully controlled, but Derek caught something dark in his eyes. "The good news is that Lucy is going to be fine," he began, and Derek felt a wave of relief wash over him. "What caused the rash?" Derek asked. Dr. Mills hesitated, glancing once more at Tiffany before answering. "It appears to be a reaction to a substance that isn't typically found in household products. I like to keep her for observation for a few more hours, just to be safe." Something in the doctor's tone suggested there was more to the story, but before Derek could ask follow-up questions, Dr. Mills was already moving toward the door. "I'll be back to check on Lucy shortly. Mr. Mitchell, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Derek followed Dr. Mills into the hallway, leaving Tiffany alone with Lucy. The doctor led him several feet away from the room before stopping and checking to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Mills began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to say, "I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you is being documented officially, and I've already notified the appropriate authorities." Derek's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Mills reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small piece of paper, folded carefully. "I can't discuss this in detail here, but you need to read this when you're alone. What I can tell you is that your daughter has been systematically poisoned with small doses of household chemicals over an extended period." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. "Poisoned? That's impossible. Who would?" He stopped, the implications of Dr. Mills' careful behavior suddenly becoming clear. "I can't say more here," Dr. Mills said quietly, pressing the note into Derek's hand. "But you need to protect your daughter, and you need to do it carefully. Don't let on that you know anything until you've read what I've written and taken appropriate action." Derek's hands trembled as he pocketed the note, his mind reeling with the implications. His daughter, his innocent, beautiful daughter, had been intentionally harmed. And if Dr. Mills' behavior was any indication, the person responsible was someone close to home. As Derek walked back toward Lucy's room, his vision seemed to narrow to a tunnel. Every instinct he possessed screamed for immediate action, for confrontation, for justice. But Dr. Mills' warning echoed in his mind. He needed to be careful, strategic. His daughter's safety depended on his next moves. Through the small window in the door, he could see Tiffany sitting beside Lucy's bed, her hand gently stroking their daughter's hair. To any observer, she would have appeared to be the picture of maternal concern. But Derek was no longer any observer. He was a father who had just learned that someone had been systematically harming his child. The note in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as Derek prepared to return to the room and face whatever truth Dr. Mills had documented. His life, as he had known it for the past 5 years, was about to change forever. Chapter 2. The Unthinkable Truth. Derek forced his expression into careful neutrality as he re-entered Lucy's room. Tiffany looked up at him with what appeared to be genuine concern, her green eyes searching his face for information about the doctor's prognosis. "What did Dr. Mills say?" she asked, her voice carrying just the right note of maternal anxiety. "He wants to keep her for observation," Derek replied carefully, settling into the chair on the opposite side of Lucy's bed. "Standard precaution with these types of reactions." Tiffany nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Poor baby," she murmured, leaning down to kiss Lucy's forehead. "At least she's sleeping comfortably now." Derek watched this display of maternal affection with new eyes, Dr. Mills' words echoing in his mind. Systematically poisoned. The phrase seemed impossible, incomprehensible. Yet as he observed Tiffany's behavior, he began to notice subtleties that had previously escaped his attention. The way her concern seemed almost theatrical, the practiced nature of her gentle touches, the subtle relief in her posture now that Lucy was sedated. "I should call work," Derek said, standing abruptly. "Let them know I won't be in for the rest of the day." "Good idea," Tiffany agreed quickly. "I'll stay with Lucy." Derek stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding as he moved toward the restroom Dr. Mills had indicated with a subtle gesture. Once inside, he locked the door and pulled out the folded note with shaking hands. Dr. Mill's handwriting was precise, urgent. Mr. Mitchell, I've treated your daughter 3 times in the past 4 months under your wife's name at different urgent care centers. Each time, Lucy presented with symptoms consistent with low-level chemical poisoning, specifically cleaning agents that contain ammonia and bleach compounds. Today's blood work confirms chronic exposure. Your wife claimed you were working and couldn't accompany them to these visits. The pattern, combined with your wife's inconsistent explanations and her reaction when she saw me today, suggests deliberate administration. I've contacted CPS and the police. Protect your daughter. Act normally until authorities can intervene safely. Your wife cannot know you're aware. Dr. R. Mills. Derek's legs gave out, and he slumped against the bathroom wall as the full horror of the situation hit him. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with their daughter's life, had been slowly poisoning Lucy. The unexplained illnesses, the times Tiffany had insisted on handling doctor visits alone, the way she always seemed to have ready explanations for Lucy's symptoms, it all made sickening sense now. The note trembled in Derek's hands as rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced coursed through his veins. This wasn't just betrayal. This was attempted murder of his child. Every protective instinct he possessed screamed for immediate action, but Dr. Mill's warning echoed in his mind. He had to be smart, had to protect Lucy above all else. Derek forced himself to breathe slowly, to think through the implications. If Tiffany had been poisoning Lucy, there had to be a reason. People didn't harm children without motivation, especially not their own children. What could she possibly gain from making Lucy sick? As Derek splashed cold water on his face, trying to regain his composure, fragments of memory began forming a disturbing pattern. Tiffany's increasing frustration with her quiet life, her complaints about Derek's long work hours, her recent mood swings, and secretive behavior. And then there were the financial irregularities he'd noticed. Credit card charges she'd explain away, cash withdrawals that seemed excessive for household expenses. A horrifying possibility began to take shape in Derek's mind. What if Lucy's illnesses weren't random acts of cruelty, but part of a larger plan? What if Tiffany was deliberately making Lucy sick to create a pattern of Derek's absence during medical emergencies, painting him as an uninvolved father? In a custody battle, such evidence could be devastating. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message, jolting him from his dark thoughts. The message was from an unknown number. Police are en route. Return to room. Act normal. Detective Rodriguez will identify herself discreetly. Dr. Mills had moved quickly. Derek deleted the message and returned to Lucy's room, where he found Tiffany scrolling through her phone while Lucy continued to sleep peacefully. Work understanding? Tiffany asked without looking up. Of course, Derek replied, settling back into his chair. Family comes first. Tiffany smiled at this, expression that would have warmed Derek's heart just hours earlier, but now made his skin crawl. How many times had she smiled at him while planning to harm their daughter? How long had she been living this double life? I've been thinking, Tiffany said casually, maybe we should consider getting Lucy a more thorough evaluation. These little illnesses seem to be happening more frequently. Derek's blood chilled at the manipulation in her voice. She was already setting up the narrative, already preparing to blame him for not being attentive enough to Lucy's declining health. What kind of evaluation? Derek asked carefully. Maybe some allergy testing, immune system workup. Sometimes children have underlying conditions that don't present obviously. Tiffany's tone was reasonable, concerned. The perfect worried mother seeking answers for her child's mysterious ailments. Before Derek could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor entered the room. She wore civilian clothes, but carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Detective Rodriguez. Dr. Mills asked me to stop by and check on Lucy's progress. Derek felt a surge of relief at the detective's arrival, though he was careful not to let it show. Tiffany looked puzzled but not alarmed. Exactly the reaction of an innocent person being visited by police in a hospital setting. Is this about the rash? Tiffany asked. Surely this isn't a police matter. Detective Rodriguez smiled warmly. Not exactly. Dr. Mills is very thorough in his documentation, and when we see certain patterns in pediatric cases, we like to follow up. It's mostly paperwork, but I do need to ask a few routine questions. What followed was a masterclass in careful interrogation. Detective Rodriguez asked seemingly innocent questions about Lucy's medical history, her daily routine, who had access to her food and drinks, what cleaning products were used in the home. Derek watched Tiffany answer with what appeared to be complete honesty. Her responses painting the picture of a devoted mother dealing with a child prone to minor illnesses. But Derek now knew what to listen for, and he caught the subtle inconsistencies in Tiffany's timeline, the way she downplayed certain symptoms while emphasizing others, the almost imperceptible tension that crept into her voice when discussing specific incidents. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez said casually, Dr. Mills mentioned that you've brought Lucy to urgent care several times recently. Has she been having more health issues than usual? Tiffany's pause was barely noticeable. She started kindergarten this year. You know how it is. Kids pick up everything when they're first exposed to classroom environments. Of course, Detective Rodriguez agreed. And you've been handling most of these medical visits? Derek works such long hours, Tiffany explained, reaching over to touch his hand in a gesture of support. I try to handle the day-to-day stuff so he can focus on providing for us. Derek felt sick at her touch, at the way she so effortlessly played the role of supportive wife while systematically destroying their family. He wanted to pull his hand away, to confront her with what he now knew, but Dr. Mills' warnings held him in check. Detective Rodriguez made notes on a small pad, her expression remaining neutral throughout the questioning. I think that covers everything for now. Dr. Mills should have Lucy's final test results soon, and then you can probably take her home. After Detective Rodriguez left, Derek found himself alone with Tiffany and Lucy once again. The silence in the room felt oppressive, loaded with unspoken truths and hidden agendas. Derek studied his wife's profile as she gazed down at their sleeping daughter, trying to reconcile the woman he'd loved for 5 years with a monster Dr. Mills had revealed her to be. Derek, Tiffany's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. You seem tense. Is everything okay? The question was so loaded with irony that Derek almost laughed. Everything was decidedly not okay. His wife was a would-be child killer. His daughter had been systematically poisoned, and his entire life had been revealed as an elaborate deception. But instead of saying any of this, Derek forced a tired smile. Just worried about Lucy, he said, which was at least partially true. Tiffany nodded sympathetically. She's going to be fine. Kids are resilient. The casual way she dismissed Lucy's suffering made Derek's hands clench into fists. He had to get out of the room before he said or did something that would compromise the investigation. I'm going to grab some coffee, he announced, standing abruptly. Want anything? I'm fine, Tiffany replied, already turning her attention back to her phone. Derek made his way to the hospital cafeteria, his mind racing with questions and implications. Who was Tiffany really? What had driven her to poison their daughter? And most importantly, what was her endgame? As he sat alone with his untouched coffee, Derek's phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Need to meet. Parking garage, level 3, southeast corner. Come alone. Derek deleted the message and made his way to the designated location, where he found Detective Rodriguez waiting beside an unmarked sedan. Her friendly demeanor from the hospital room had been replaced by grim professionalism. Mr. Mitchell, she began without preamble. We need to talk about what happens next. Your wife is going to be arrested, but we need to do this carefully to ensure Lucy's safety and preserve the evidence we've gathered. Derek nodded, still struggling to process the reality of the situation. What evidence? Dr. Mills documented everything. Lucy's symptoms, the timeline of her visits, the blood work showing chronic exposure to household chemicals. We've also been in contact with the other urgent care facilities your wife visited. The pattern is clear and consistent. But why? Derek asked, the question that had been tearing at him since reading Dr. Mills' note. Why would she do this to Lucy? Detective Rodriguez's expression darkened. We believe your wife has been building a case for full custody of Lucy. By establishing a pattern of your absence during medical emergencies and documenting Lucy's declining health in your care, she was creating evidence that you're an unfit father. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Derek thought about the credit card statements he'd questioned, the cash withdrawals, Tiffany's secretive phone calls. She's been planning to leave me. We think so, yes. And she wanted to make sure she could take Lucy and potentially secure significant alimony and child support payments. Detective Rodriguez paused. There's something else, Mr. Mitchell. We have reason to believe your wife hasn't been acting alone. Derek's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Security cameras at one of the urgent care facilities caught your wife meeting with a man in the parking lot after one of Lucy's appointments. They appeared to be having an intimate conversation. The betrayal cut even deeper than Derek had thought possible. Not only had Tiffany been poisoning their daughter, but she'd been cheating on him too. And worse, her lover was apparently complicit in the abuse of an innocent child. Who is he? Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We're still working on identification, but we'll know soon. Detective Rodriguez studied Derek's face carefully. I need you to understand something, Mr. Mitchell. What your wife has done is unspeakable, but the law will handle her punishment. You cannot take matters into your own hands. Derek nodded, but behind his careful expression, something cold and calculating was taking root. The law might handle Tiffany's punishment, but Derek was beginning to form his own ideas about justice. Some betrayals were too deep, too fundamental, to be resolved through conventional means. As Derek returned to the hospital room where his poisoned daughter slept and his treacherous wife waited, he began to understand that his life had been divided into two distinct periods, before he learned the truth and after. The man he had been, trusting, forgiving, willing to see the best in people, was gone forever. In his place was someone harder, someone who understood that some people forfeited their right to mercy when they harmed innocent children. And Derek Mitchell was about to become very creative in his interpretation of justice. Chapter 3. The Web of Deception. Derek returned to Lucy's room with his expression carefully controlled, but internally, everything had changed. The knowledge that Tiffany wasn't acting alone had transformed his heartbreak into something far more dangerous. A cold, calculating rage that demanded not just justice, but complete and total retribution. Lucy was beginning to stir, her small eyelids fluttering as the sedative wore off. Derek immediately moved to her side, taking her tiny hand in his much larger one. Daddy. Lucy's voice was small and confused. I'm here, sweetheart, Derek said softly, his voice catching slightly as he looked at his innocent daughter, the victim of a scheme so twisted he was still struggling to comprehend it. Tiffany rose from her chair and moved to Lucy's other side, her performance of maternal concern flawless. How are you feeling, baby? Tired, Lucy murmured, then looked around the unfamiliar hospital room with growing awareness. Why am I here? You had a little rash, honey, Tiffany explained gently. The doctors wanted to make sure you're okay. Derek watched this exchange with new eyes, noting how easily Tiffany lied to their daughter, how practiced her deception had become. How long had she been living this double life? How many lies had she told him over the years? Dr. Mills appeared in the doorway, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes holding a weight that Derek now understood. How's our patient doing? Much better, Derek replied, squeezing Lucy's hand gently. When can we take her home? The final test results look good, Dr. Mills said carefully. I'd like to see her back in my office in a few days for a follow-up, but she should be fine to go home tonight. Derek caught the subtle emphasis on my office. Dr. Mills was ensuring continued monitoring of Lucy's condition, creating a documented trail that would be crucial for the legal case against Tiffany. As Dr. Mills completed his final examination of Lucy, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from his foreman at the construction site. Emergency with the Riverside project. Need you here ASAP. Under normal circumstances, Derek would have explained that he needed to stay with his sick daughter. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Derek suddenly realized this might be an opportunity to learn more about Tiffany's secret life. I have to run to the site for about an hour, Derek announced, watching Tiffany's reaction carefully. There's an emergency with the Riverside project. Tiffany's response was immediate and telling, a flash of relief that she quickly masked with concern. Go ahead, she said. Lucy and I'll be fine here until you get back. Derek kissed Lucy's forehead and squeezed Tiffany's shoulder, playing the role of devoted husband and father, even as bile rose in his throat at the contact. I'll be back as soon as possible. Instead of going to the construction site, Derek drove to a parking garage 3 blocks from the hospital and called Detective Rodriguez. She answered on the first ring. I need to know who he is, Derek said without preamble. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your urgency, but my wife is alone with my daughter right now, Derek interrupted. A daughter she's been systematically poisoning. You told me she has an accomplice. I need to know who I'm dealing with. There was a pause before Detective Rodriguez spoke again. We've identified him. His name is Troy Brennan. He's a personal trainer at Zenith Fitness, the gym your wife belongs to. Derek closed his eyes, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Tiffany had joined Zenith Fitness 8 months ago, claiming she needed a new fitness routine to combat stress. She'd been going 3 times a week, always during Lucy's school hours, always when Derek was at work. How long have they been involved? Security footage suggests at least 6 months. Mr. Mitchell, we're moving to arrest your wife tonight, after Lucy is safely home and in bed. We need you to act normally until then. Derek ended the call and sat in his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he processed this new information. Troy Brennan. The name meant nothing to him, but this stranger had participated in a plot to poison Derek's daughter. The violation felt even more profound, not just his wife's betrayal, but the involvement of an outsider in his family's destruction. Derek's mind began working through possibilities, scenarios, plans. The police would arrest Tiffany and probably Troy as well. They'd be charged, tried, and sentenced. Justice would be served through the legal system. But Derek was beginning to understand that legal justice might not be enough. Some crimes transcended what courts and judges could address. Some betrayals demanded a more personal response. Derek returned to the hospital to find Lucy sitting up in bed, looking much more like herself. The rash had faded considerably, and her color was returning to normal. Dr. Mills was completing discharge paperwork while Tiffany packed Lucy's few belongings. Feeling better, sweetheart? Derek asked, lifting Lucy into his arms. Much better, Daddy. Can we go home now? Absolutely, Derek said, carrying her toward the door while Tiffany gathered the rest of their things. The drive home was surreal. Lucy chattered about the nice nurses and the magic medicine that made her feel better, while Tiffany maintained her performance of relieved motherhood. Derek responded appropriately to both of them, while his mind raced with dark possibilities. At home, Derek carried Lucy upstairs for a bath while Tiffany went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. As Derek helped Lucy wash off the hospital smell, he found himself studying every inch of her small body, looking for other signs of abuse he might have missed. The thought that he'd failed to protect her from the person who should have loved her most was almost unbearable. Daddy, you look sad, Lucy observed as Derek helped her into her pajamas. Derek forced a smile. Just tired, baby. It's been a long day. Mommy says I get sick because my body isn't very strong, Lucy said matter-of-factly. But Dr. Mills said I'm actually very healthy. Derek's blood chilled at this casual revelation. Even at 5 years old, Lucy was beginning to notice inconsistencies in the stories she'd been told. How much psychological damage had Tiffany's deception already caused? Dr. Mills is right, Derek said carefully. You're a very healthy little girl. After tucking Lucy into bed with extra hugs and kisses, Derek returned downstairs to find Tiffany cleaning up the kitchen. She looked up at him with a smile that had once melted his heart, but now made his stomach turn. She seems completely back to normal, Tiffany said, drying her hands on a dish towel. Kids bounce back so quickly. Derek nodded, leaning against the kitchen counter as he studied his wife. She was beautiful, he had to admit. Even knowing what he now knew about her, he could understand how he'd been so completely fooled. But underneath that beauty was something rotten, something capable of harming an innocent child for personal gain. Tiffany, Derek said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. She moved closer to him, her green eyes wide and trusting. Have you been happy? In our marriage, I mean. The question seemed to catch her off guard. What kind of question is that? I've been thinking about what Dr. Mills said about Lucy's health issues. It made me realize how much I've been at work lately, how much I've been leaving you to handle on your own. Derek forced concern into his voice. I don't want my absence to be putting stress on you or Lucy. Tiffany's expression softened, and for a moment, Derek caught a glimpse of what might have been genuine emotion. Derek, you work hard to provide for us. I understand that. But it's not just about providing, Derek pressed. I want to make sure you feel supported, fulfilled. If there's anything missing in your life, anything you need that you're not getting. For just an instant, Tiffany's mask slipped. Derek saw guilt flash across her features before she recovered her composure. I have everything I need, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Derek nodded and pulled her into his arms, hating every second of the contact, but needing to maintain his cover. I love you, he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. I love you too, Tiffany replied, and Derek wondered if she was capable of understanding what those words actually meant. As they prepared for bed, Derek's phone buzzed with a final message from Detective Rodriguez. Team in position. We'll move at 11 p.m. Keep your daughter safe. Derek deleted the message and climbed into bed beside the woman who had been slowly murdering his child. In less than 2 hours, Tiffany would be arrested, and this chapter of Derek's life would end. But as he lay in the darkness, listening to Tiffany's breathing gradually even out, Derek was already planning what would come next. The legal system would handle Tiffany and Troy according to the law. But Derek was beginning to understand that there were other forms of justice, other ways to ensure that those who betrayed him would pay a price that went far beyond prison sentences and legal penalties. Some people, Derek was learning, forfeited their right to mercy when they crossed certain lines. And poisoning his daughter was a line that could never be uncrossed, never be forgiven, never be forgotten. As the clock ticked toward 11 p.m., Derek Mitchell began his transformation from betrayed husband to something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. At exactly 11:17 p.m., Derek heard the soft knock on his front door that would change everything. He had been lying awake for hours, his body tense as he listened to Tiffany's steady breathing beside him. When the knock came, he felt her stir slightly, but not wake. The sleeping pills she'd been taking for the past month, ensuring she remained unconscious during what would be the most important arrest of Detective Rodriguez's career. Derek slipped out of bed and made his way downstairs, where he found Detective Rodriguez and 3 other officers waiting on his porch. Their expressions were grim but determined, and Derek could see the gravity of the situation reflected in their eyes. Is Lucy safe? Detective Rodriguez asked quietly. Upstairs, sleeping, Derek confirmed. Tiffany took her sleeping medication about an hour ago. Good. We need to do this carefully. We don't want Lucy to be traumatized any more than necessary. Derek led the officers upstairs, his heart pounding as they approached the bedroom where his wife lay sleeping, unaware that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse around her. Detective Rodriguez positioned herself at the foot of the bed while the other officers flanked the sides. Tiffany Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez said in a clear, authoritative voice. Wake up. You're under arrest. Tiffany's eyes snapped open, immediately darting between the unfamiliar faces surrounding her bed and Derek, who stood in the doorway. For a moment, confusion dominated her features, but Derek watched as understanding gradually dawned, and with it, a cold calculation that confirmed everything he'd learned about her true nature. What is this? Tiffany demanded, sitting up and pulling the blanket around herself. Derek, what's happening? Tiffany Mitchell, you're under arrest for child abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping, Detective Rodriguez announced, beginning to read Tiffany her rights. Derek watched his wife's face as the charges were read, noting the way her expression shifted from confusion to outrage to something that looked almost like relief. There was no shock, no genuine surprise, only the reaction of someone whose elaborate plan had finally been discovered. "This is insane," Tiffany protested as one of the officers moved to handcuff her. "Derek, tell them this is crazy. I would never hurt Lucy." But Derek remained silent, his arms crossed as he observed the woman he'd once loved being arrested for attempting to murder their daughter. The performance was flawless, he had to admit. Even now, caught red-handed, Tiffany maintained her act of innocent motherhood. "We have documentation from multiple medical facilities," Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez explained calmly. "Blood tests showing chronic exposure to household chemicals, security footage, witness statements. Your daughter has been systematically poisoned over a period of months." For just an instant, Tiffany's mask slipped again, and Derek caught a flash of something cold and calculating in her eyes. Then she was back to playing the victim, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Derek, please," she begged as the officers prepared to escort her out. "You know I love Lucy. You know I would never hurt her. There has to be some mistake." Derek stepped aside to let the officers pass, meeting Tiffany's eyes for what he knew would be the last time. "I know exactly what you are," he said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that made Tiffany's face go pale. As they led her away, Derek heard Lucy's bedroom door creak open. His daughter appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes and looking confused by the commotion. "Daddy? What's happening? Where are they taking Mommy?" Derek knelt down and gathered Lucy into his arms, his heart breaking at the innocence in her voice. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her mother had been slowly poisoning her? How do you help a child understand that level of betrayal? "Mommy had to go away for a while, sweetheart," Derek said carefully. "But you're safe now. I'm going to make sure you're always safe." Lucy buried her face against Derek's shoulder, and he felt her small body trembling. Whether from confusion, fear, or some instinctive understanding of what had transpired, Derek couldn't tell. But he held her tightly, making silent promises about the protection and justice he would provide. Detective Rodriguez approached after the other officers had left with Tiffany. "We'll need Lucy to be examined by a specialist, someone who works with children who've been abused. It's important for the case, but also for her psychological well-being." Derek nodded, still holding Lucy close. "What happens now?" "Tiffany will be arraigned in the morning. Bail is unlikely given the nature of the charges and the ongoing danger to Lucy." Rodriguez paused. "There's something else, Mr. Mitchell. We arrested Troy Brennan an hour ago at his apartment. He had detailed records of his meetings with your wife, including plans for how they intended to frame you as an unfit father." Derek's grip on Lucy tightened involuntarily. "Plans, financial records, custody research, even consultation notes from a divorce attorney." Rodriguez's expression darkened. "They've been planning this for months, Mr. Mitchell. The poisoning was just one part of a larger scheme to destroy your reputation and take everything you've worked for." After Detective Rodriguez left, Derek carried Lucy back to her room and tucked her into bed. As he sat beside her, stroking her hair until she fell back asleep, Derek's mind began working through the implications of what he'd learned. Tiffany and Troy hadn't just betrayed him. They'd orchestrated an elaborate plan to steal his daughter, his business, his entire life. The legal system would punish them according to the law. But Derek was beginning to understand that legal punishment might not be sufficient for crimes this personal, this devastating. Some betrayals demanded a more creative response. Over the next few days, as Derek navigated the initial chaos of Tiffany's arrest and Lucy's medical evaluations, he began to research Troy Brennan with the same methodical precision he brought to his construction projects. What Derek discovered painted a picture of a man who had made predatory behavior his livelihood. Troy was 32, a former amateur bodybuilder who had transitioned into personal training when injuries ended his competitive career. But his real specialty seemed to be targeting wealthy, unhappy wives, women who felt neglected by successful husbands and were vulnerable to the attention of an attractive younger man. Through careful investigation, Derek learned that Tiffany wasn't Troy's first victim. Over the past 5 years, Troy had been involved with at least 3 other married women, each relationship ending when the women left their husbands and provided Troy with substantial financial benefits. In one case, A woman had divorced her husband and signed over half her settlement to Troy before he disappeared from her life entirely. The pattern was clear. Troy identified vulnerable targets, seduced them, convinced them their marriages were loveless prisons, then helped them extract maximum financial benefit from their divorces before moving on to his next victim. But with Tiffany, the plan had escalated to include child abuse, a line that transformed Troy from a sophisticated con artist into something far more dangerous. Derek's research also revealed something else. Troy had significant financial debts, gambling problems, and a lifestyle that required constant infusions of cash. The scheme with Tiffany wasn't just about romance. It was about survival. Troy needed the money Derek's destruction would provide. As Derek pieced together the full scope of their betrayal, his anger evolved into something colder and more focused. Both Tiffany and Troy had made calculated decisions to destroy his family for personal gain. They had put Lucy's life at risk for money and convenience. Such choices, Derek decided, carried consequences that extended far beyond legal punishment. Derek began to formulate a plan, not for revenge, exactly, but for justice of a more personal and comprehensive nature. The legal system would handle their crimes according to established law, but Derek would ensure they paid a price that reflected the true cost of their betrayals. He started by quietly transferring assets, protecting his business interests, and securing Lucy's future. If Tiffany and Troy had planned to destroy his financial life, Derek would make sure they discovered what real financial destruction looked like. But more than money was at stake. Derek's reputation, his relationship with his daughter, his ability to trust anyone again, all of these had been damaged by their scheme. The price for that damage would be paid in full, with interest, over a timeline of Derek's choosing. As Derek tucked Lucy into bed each night and saw the confusion in her innocent eyes, as he dealt with the whispers and stares from neighbors who had heard about Tiffany's arrest, as he struggled to explain to Lucy why Mommy couldn't come home, Derek's resolve hardened into something unbreakable. Some people, he was learning, forfeited their right to mercy when they crossed certain lines. And Derek Mitchell was about to become very creative in showing them exactly what consequences looked like when designed by someone who understood both patience and precision. The legal reckoning had begun, but Derek's personal form of justice was just getting started. Chapter 5. The Art of Destruction. 3 weeks after Tiffany's arrest, Derek stood in the courtroom and watched his wife plead not guilty to all charges. She wore an orange jumpsuit that made her skin look sallow, and her once perfect hair hung limp around her shoulders. But even in custody, Tiffany maintained her performance of innocent victimhood, dabbing at her eyes with tissues and looking toward Derek with expressions of wounded betrayal. Beside her sat her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Vance who specialized in defending cases involving alleged child abuse. Derek had researched her too. She was expensive, aggressive, and had a reputation for turning victim narratives on their heads. Your Honor, Patricia Vance addressed the judge, my client is the victim of a vindictive husband who has manufactured evidence to destroy her reputation and steal custody of their daughter. The charges against Mrs. Mitchell are based on circumstantial evidence and the biased testimony of medical professionals who have been influenced by Mr. Mitchell's accusations. Derek felt his jaw clench as he listened to the attorney systematically attempt to dismantle the case against Tiffany. The strategy was becoming clear. Paint Derek as a controlling husband who had somehow orchestrated the medical evidence against his innocent wife. Furthermore, Vance continued, we intend to prove that Mr. Mitchell has been psychologically abusing both my client and their daughter, creating an atmosphere of fear and control that led to the false accusations now before this court. Detective Rodriguez, sitting beside Derek, leaned over and whispered standard defense strategy. They're going to try to flip the script. Derek nodded, but internally, he was taking notes. Every lie Tiffany's attorney told, every false accusation leveled against him, was being cataloged for future reference. They wanted to play victim? Derek would show them what being a victim actually looked like. Troy Brennan's arraignment was scheduled for the following day, and Derek planned to attend that as well. He wanted to see the man who had helped orchestrate his family's destruction, to study his face and manner, to understand exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. When Derek did get his first look at Troy in person, he was struck by how ordinary the man appeared. Tall and muscular, certainly, with the kind of artificial charm that probably worked well on lonely housewives, but nothing that suggested the calculating predator Derek knew him to be. Troy's attorney was cut from the same cloth as Tiffany's: expensive, aggressive, and completely uninterested in the truth. He painted Troy as an innocent personal trainer who had been seduced by a manipulative client, a victim of Tiffany's schemes rather than a co-conspirator. "My client had no knowledge of Mrs. Mitchell's alleged actions toward her daughter," Troy's attorney argued. He was led to believe that her marriage was abusive and that she was seeking a legitimate divorce. Any assistance he provided was based on false information provided by Mrs. Mitchell herself. Derek almost admired the strategy: pit the co-conspirators against each other, let them destroy each other's credibility while maintaining their individual innocence. It was sophisticated, professional, and exactly the kind of legal maneuvering Derek had expected. But Derek had been preparing for this possibility. Over the past 3 weeks, while caring for Lucy and managing his business, he had also been conducting his own investigation into both Tiffany and Troy's backgrounds. What he discovered would have surprised their attorneys. Derek had hired a private investigator named Robert Chun, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and background research. Chin's report had revealed a pattern of behavior from both Tiffany and Troy that went far beyond their scheme against Derek's family. Tiffany, it turned out, had been systematically stealing money from Derek's business accounts for over a year. Small amounts, carefully hidden through false invoices and manipulated receipts, but totaling nearly $75,000. She had been funneling this money into a secret account that she shared with Troy. Troy's financial records revealed a history of similar schemes with other women. He had used identical tactics, targeting unhappy wives, convincing them to leave their husbands, then extracting money through various manipulations before disappearing. In 3 previous cases, the women had been left financially and emotionally devastated while Troy moved on to his next target. But Derek's investigation had gone deeper than financial records. Chin had uncovered evidence of Troy's gambling debts, his connections to some unsavory characters who were becoming impatient about repayment, and his history of using false identities and forged documents in previous schemes. Most importantly, Derek had discovered that Troy and Tiffany's plan extended beyond just framing Derek as an unfit father. They had been researching ways to gain access to Derek's business assets, his property holdings, and even his personal accounts. The child abuse was just one component of a comprehensive plan to destroy Derek's life and steal everything he had worked to build. Armed with this information, Derek began to implement his own comprehensive plan for justice. But unlike Tiffany and Troy's scheme, Derek's plan was legal, methodical, and designed to ensure that his targets would face consequences for every aspect of their betrayal. Derek started with the financial crimes. He provided Chin's evidence to Detective Rodriguez, who forwarded it to the district attorney's office. Within a week, additional charges of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud were filed against both Tiffany and Troy. But Derek's plan went beyond criminal charges. He began a systematic campaign to expose every aspect of their scheme to anyone who might be affected by their actions. He contacted Troy's previous victims, providing them with evidence of the pattern of abuse and helping them understand that they hadn't been the only targets. 3 of Troy's previous victims came forward with their own stories, and suddenly the case against him expanded from child abuse to a pattern of predatory behavior spanning several years. The media began to take notice, and Troy's reputation as a fitness professional was destroyed overnight. Derek also began targeting their support systems. He researched Patricia Vance's previous cases and discovered that she had a history of representing clients who were later proven to be lying about abuse claims. Derek made sure this information reached the right journalists, the right legal blogs, the right places where it would damage her reputation for taking on Tiffany's case. For Troy's attorney, Derek discovered a pattern of overbilling clients and manipulating legal fees. Anonymous tips to the State Bar Association resulted in an investigation that would eventually lead to sanctions and suspension. But Derek's most creative efforts were directed at their personal lives. He knew that both Tiffany and Troy had built their schemes on deception and manipulation, so he began systematically exposing those deceptions to everyone in their orbit. Derek contacted every member of Tiffany's yoga class and book club, providing them with court documents that showed the extent of her lies. He reached out to Troy's clients at the gym, letting them know about his arrest and the charges against him. He made sure that every friend, acquaintance, and professional contact understood exactly what kind of people they had been associating with. The social consequences were swift and devastating. Tiffany's friends abandoned her, unwilling to be associated with someone who had poisoned a child. Troy's clients canceled their training sessions and demanded refunds. Their reputations were systematically destroyed, piece by piece, relationship by relationship. Derek also used his position in the community to maximum effect. As a successful business owner and respected member of the local Chamber of Commerce, Derek had connections throughout the area. He made sure that everyone understood not just what Tiffany and Troy had done, but the calculated, premeditated nature of their scheme. Within 6 weeks of their arrests, both Tiffany and Troy found themselves completely isolated, their support systems destroyed, their reputations in ruins, and facing a legal system that was increasingly unsympathetic to their claims of innocence. But Derek wasn't finished. He had learned that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring that the consequences of betrayal were comprehensive and permanent. Tiffany and Troy had tried to destroy his life systematically, and Derek was returning the favor with methodical precision. As he tucked Lucy into bed each night, Derek felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple revenge. He was teaching his daughter an important lesson about consequences, about the price of betrayal, about the fact that some lines could never be crossed without permanent repercussions. The legal system would handle their crimes according to the law, but Derek Mitchell was handling their punishment according to a more personal standard of justice, one that ensured they would never again be in a position to harm another family the way they had tried to harm his. Chapter 6. The Perfect Trap. 6 months into the legal proceedings, Derek received a call that would provide him with the perfect opportunity to complete his campaign of justice. Robert Chun, his private investigator, had uncovered something that would change everything. "Derek," Chun said over the phone, his voice carrying an excitement that Derek had rarely heard from the usually stoic former FBI agent. "You need to see this. I found something that connects Troy to activities that go way beyond what we've already discovered." Derek met Chun at a small cafe downtown, away from prying eyes and curious ears. The investigator spread a collection of documents across their secluded table, his expression grim but satisfied. "I've been tracking Troy's financial history more deeply," Chun began, "and I discovered that he's been running what amounts to a sophisticated identity theft operation alongside his romance scams." Derek studied the documents Chun had assembled: bank records, credit applications, false identification documents, and a complex web of financial transactions that painted a picture of criminal activity far more extensive than anyone had imagined. "He targets the women for more than just money," Chun continued. "He gains access to their personal information, their social security numbers, their financial accounts, and then uses that information to establish false credit lines and fraudulent accounts. Some of these women don't even know they've been victimized because the damage doesn't show up until months or years later." Derek felt a cold satisfaction as he absorbed this information. Troy wasn't just a predator who targeted lonely wives. He was a sophisticated criminal who had been destroying lives for years. This evidence would ensure that his legal troubles extended far beyond the charges related to Lucy's abuse. "There's more," Chun said, pulling out another set of documents. "I found evidence that Tiffany knew about the identity theft scheme. She helped him gather information from other women at the gym, other yoga classes, anywhere she could get access to personal information." Before we proceed with sentencing, Judge Hawthorne announced, "I want to hear from the victims. Mr. Mitchell, would you like to address the court?" Derek stood slowly, his prepared statement in his hand, but he found that he didn't need to refer to it. The words came from a place of deep conviction, shaped by months of pain, investigation, and careful planning. Your Honor, Derek began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. These defendants didn't just commit crimes. They systematically destroyed lives for their own profit and convenience. They poisoned my 5-year-old daughter, stole money from multiple families, and orchestrated identity theft schemes that devastated innocent people. Derek turned to look directly at Tiffany and Troy, his expression cold and unforgiving. But what makes their crimes particularly heinous is the calculating nature of their deception. This wasn't impulsive wrongdoing. It was a carefully planned campaign to destroy families and steal everything those families had worked to build. Derek continued for several minutes, detailing not just the crimes themselves, but the comprehensive investigation that had revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. He spoke about the victims who had lost their homes, their savings, their ability to trust anyone again. These defendants have forfeited any right to mercy or forgiveness, Derek concluded. They have proven themselves to be predators who view other people's lives as nothing more than resources to be exploited. I ask this court to impose sentences that ensure they will never again be in a position to harm innocent families. One by one, the other victims addressed the court. Each story was heartbreaking. Elderly women who had lost their retirement savings, single mothers who had been left financially devastated, families who had been forced into bankruptcy by fraudulent activities they hadn't even known were occurring. Derek watched Tiffany and Troy's faces during these victim impact statements. Tiffany maintained her mask of remorseful innocence, dabbing at her eyes with tissues and looking appropriately sorrowful. But Derek could see the calculation behind her performance, the way she was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Troy's reaction was more telling. As victim after victim described the devastation he had caused, Derek saw flashes of something that might have been genuine emotion. Whether guilt, fear, or simply frustration at being caught, Derek couldn't tell. When all the victims had spoken, Judge Hawthorne addressed the defendants. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Brennan, you have pleaded guilty to charges that represent some of the most systematic and heartless criminal behavior I have encountered in 20 years on the federal bench. The judge continued for several minutes, describing the scope of their crimes and the impact on their victims. Derek felt a deep satisfaction as Judge Hawthorne methodically dismantled any remaining pretense that these had been crimes of passion or desperation. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Hawthorne said finally, you have been convicted of child abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend 15 to 20 years imprisonment. However, given the systematic nature of your crimes and the particular vulnerability of your primary victim, your own daughter, I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Derek felt Lucy's small hand slip into his as Tiffany's mask finally cracked, revealing the cold fury underneath her performance of victimhood. For just a moment, she looked directly at Derek with an expression of pure hatred, confirming everything he had learned about her true nature. Mr. Brennan, Judge Hawthorne continued, your role as the architect of these schemes makes you even more culpable. You targeted vulnerable women, gained their trust, and then systematically destroyed their lives for financial gain. You bear responsibility not just for your own actions, but for enabling and directing Mrs. Mitchell's abuse of her daughter. Derek watched Troy's face as the judge spoke, noting the way his composure finally began to crack as the reality of a situation became undeniable. Mr. Brennan, I hereby sentence you to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, both defendants will be required to pay full restitution to all identified victims, and all assets will be forfeited to the federal government for distribution to those you have harmed. As the bailiffs moved to escort Tiffany and Troy from the courtroom, Derek felt a sense of completion that went beyond simple satisfaction. Justice had been served, but more importantly, Derek had ensured that the consequences matched the scope of their betrayal. After the hearing, Derek and Lucy walked out of the courthouse together. Several of the other victims approached Derek to thank him for his role in exposing the full extent of the criminal enterprise and ensuring that justice was comprehensive rather than limited to the original charges. Mr. Mitchell, said Martha Stevens, a 70-year-old woman who had lost her retirement savings to Troy's schemes, "I don't know how to thank you. Without your investigation, I never would have understood what happened to my money." Derek squeezed the elderly woman's hand gently. "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Stevens. We were all victims of the same predators. Making sure they faced full consequences for everything they did was the least I could do." As Derek and Lucy drove home, Lucy looked up at her father with the serious expression she sometimes wore when processing difficult concepts. "Daddy," she said quietly, "are the bad people going to be gone for a long time?" Derek glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, they're going to be gone for a very long time. Long enough that you'll be all grown up before they could ever bother anyone again." Lucy nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" Derek smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile he'd allowed himself in over a year. "Absolutely. We can get whatever kind you want." As they drove toward the ice cream shop, Derek reflected on what he had learned about justice, betrayal, and the price of crossing certain lines. The legal system had provided the framework for accountability, but true justice had required personal involvement, careful planning, and an unwavering commitment to comprehensive consequences. Derek had become an expert in making sure that people who betrayed his trust faced the full weight of their choices. And he had sent a clear message to anyone who might consider threatening his family in the future. Some lines could never be crossed without permanent, devastating repercussions. Most importantly, Derek had protected Lucy and ensured that she would grow up understanding that her father would never allow anyone to harm her without facing consequences that matched the scope of their crimes. The legal reckoning was complete. But Derek's transformation from trusting husband to ruthless protector was permanent, irreversible, and absolute. Chapter 8: Building a New Legacy. 2 years after the sentencing, Derek stood in the conference room of Mitchell Construction, looking out at the assembled team of investigators, attorneys, and support staff he had carefully assembled. What had started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into something much larger, a comprehensive operation dedicated to protecting families from predators like Tiffany and Troy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek addressed the group, "today marks the launch of the Family Protection Initiative. Our mission is simple: identify, expose, and neutralize individuals who prey on families and children." Derek had used the skills he developed during his campaign against Tiffany and Troy to build something unprecedented, a private organization that combined investigative expertise, legal support, and financial resources to protect vulnerable families from sophisticated predators. Robert Chun, now Derek's full-time director of investigations, presented their first case. "We've identified a pattern of behavior similar to Troy's operation in Denver. A personal trainer named Marcus Webb has been targeting wealthy divorced women, gaining access to their children, and we suspect engaging in various forms of abuse and financial exploitation." Derek studied the file Chun presented. The similarities to Troy's methods were striking. The same careful targeting of vulnerable women, the same gradual infiltration of family dynamics, the same systematic exploitation for financial gain. "What's our timeline?" Derek asked. "We can have a complete background report within 2 weeks," Chun replied. "Financial records, previous victims, criminal history, the full profile." Derek nodded. "Do it, and reach out to local law enforcement. I want them fully briefed on what we're finding." The Family Protection Initiative had grown out of Derek's realization that predators like Tiffany and Troy weren't isolated cases. They were part of a larger pattern of sophisticated criminals who targeted families because families were trusting, vulnerable, and often unprepared for systematic deception. Derek had invested heavily in building an organization that could identify these predators before they caused irreparable damage. Using his construction business as a foundation, Derek had created a network of investigators, legal experts, and support personnel who specialized in protecting families from exactly the kind of threats his own family had faced. The initiative operated in a legal gray area. Not quite law enforcement, not quite private security, but something uniquely effective at identifying and neutralizing threats to family safety. Derek had learned that sometimes protecting innocent people required methods and resources that traditional law enforcement couldn't provide. Lucy, now 7 years old, had blossomed in the years since Tiffany's imprisonment. Derek had arranged for the best possible counseling and support, and his daughter showed no lasting psychological damage from her mother's abuse. More importantly, Lucy was growing up understanding that her father would go to any lengths to protect her, a lesson Derek considered invaluable. "Daddy," Lucy had asked him just a week before, "why do some people try to hurt families?" Derek had thought carefully before answering. "Because some people think only about themselves, sweetheart. They don't care about other people's feelings or safety. That's why it's important to be very careful about who we trust." "But you protected us," Lucy said with the simple confidence of a child who trusted her father completely. "I did," Derek confirmed. "And I always will." Derek's transformation from betrayed husband to family protector had been complete and irreversible. He had learned that trust was a precious commodity that had to be earned through actions, not words. He had also learned that some people forfeited their right to mercy when they crossed certain lines, particularly lines involving the safety of children. The Family Protection Initiative's second case involved a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatrician who had been systematically over-medicating children in her care to increase billing and create artificial medical crises that she then solved to enhance her reputation. Derek's team had identified the pattern through careful analysis of insurance records and medical outcomes. Dr. Kim's patients showed statistically improbable rates of certain conditions that required expensive, ongoing treatment, conditions that mysteriously improved when families moved to different doctors. "She's been creating sick children to build her practice," Chin reported to Derek during their weekly briefing. "Some of these kids have been on unnecessary medications for years." Derek felt the familiar cold anger that had driven his campaign against Tiffany and Troy. Adults who harmed children for personal gain represented the worst form of betrayal, a violation of the most fundamental trust between protector and protected. "What do we need to stop her?" Derek asked. "We need more evidence to convince law enforcement," Chin replied. "Medical fraud is complex, and prosecutors want ironclad cases before they move against licensed physicians." Derek nodded grimly. "Then we get them ironclad evidence, whatever it takes." Over the following months, Derek's team conducted one of the most thorough investigations in the initiative's history. They documented every suspicious case, interviewed former patients and families, and built a comprehensive picture of Dr. Kim's systematic abuse of her position. The investigation revealed that Dr. Kim had been harming children for over 5 years, affecting more than 200 families. Some children had suffered permanent damage from unnecessary medications and procedures. Others had been psychologically traumatized by constant medical interventions they didn't need. When Derek's team finally presented their evidence to federal prosecutors, the case was so thorough and compelling that arrests were made within a week. Dr. Kim was charged with medical fraud, child abuse, and racketeering, charges that would result in decades in prison and the complete destruction of her medical career. But Derek's satisfaction came not just from stopping Dr. Kim, but from the broader implications of the initiative's work. Word was spreading through professional networks that families now had protection against predators who might target them. The mere existence of the Family Protection Initiative was serving as a deterrent to those who might consider exploiting vulnerable families. Derek had also begun working with law enforcement agencies to share information and coordinate investigations. His resources and investigative capabilities complemented official law enforcement efforts, creating a more comprehensive approach to protecting families from sophisticated predators. "Mr. Mitchell," Detective Rodriguez said during one of their regular meetings, "what you've built here is remarkable. We're identifying and stopping predators that might have operated for years without detection." Derek nodded, but his expression remained focused. "It's not enough to just stop them," he replied. "We have to make sure the consequences are so severe that others won't consider following in their footsteps." Derek's approach to justice had evolved beyond simple punishment to include comprehensive deterrence. Every case the initiative handled was documented and publicized to ensure that potential predators understood the level of scrutiny and consequences they would face if they targeted families. The message was clear: families were no longer soft targets. They now had protection that combined investigative expertise, legal resources, and an unwavering commitment to ensuring that those who harmed children and families face consequences that match the scope of their crimes. As Derek reviewed the initiative's growing caseload, he reflected on how his personal tragedy had been transformed into something that protected countless other families. Tiffany and Troy's betrayal had created something they never could have anticipated: a man who understood both the methods predators used and the resources needed to stop them. Derek Mitchell had become the kind of protector he wished had existed when his own family was under attack. And he was just getting started. Chapter 9. The Protector's Legacy. 5 years after Tiffany's sentencing, Derek stood before the annual conference of the National Association of Family Protection Organizations, an umbrella group that had grown out of the success of his own initiative. What had started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into a nationwide movement dedicated to protecting families from predators. When I first discovered that my wife had been systematically poisoning our daughter, Derek told the assembled audience of investigators, attorneys, law enforcement officials, and victim advocates, I thought I was dealing with an isolated tragedy. I had no idea that we were actually confronting a much larger problem: sophisticated predators who target families because families are trusting, vulnerable, and often unprepared for systematic deception. Derek's opening remarks were followed by presentations from teams across the country who had adopted his methods and philosophy. The Family Protection Initiative had become a model for comprehensive investigation and intervention, combining private resources with law enforcement cooperation to identify and neutralize threats before they could cause irreparable damage. In the 5 years since Tiffany's arrest, Derek's organization had been involved in exposing and stopping over 50 predators. Teachers who abused their positions to harm students, coaches who exploited young athletes, medical professionals who overtreated children for financial gain, and romance scammers who targeted single parents. The variety of threats was staggering, but the patterns were consistent. The key insight, Derek explained to his audience, is that predators rely on isolation and secrecy. They depend on families being too trusting, too overwhelmed, or too intimidated to investigate suspicious behavior. When we provide families with professional investigative support and legal resources, predators lose their primary advantages. Derek's presentation included case studies that demonstrated the evolution of his methods. The Dr. Kim case had led to the development of medical oversight protocols that helped identify suspicious patterns in pediatric care. The Marcus Webb investigation in Denver had resulted in new screening procedures for fitness and recreational programs involving children. But Derek's most significant achievement was the creation of a network that allowed information sharing between family protection organizations across the country. Predators who might have operated successfully by moving between jurisdictions or targeting isolated families now faced coordinated investigation and intervention. We've learned that protecting families requires more than just catching criminals after they've committed crimes, Derek continued. We have to identify threats before they fully develop, intervene before irreparable damage is done, and ensure that consequences are so comprehensive that others won't consider following the same path. After his presentation, Derek was approached by Maria Santos, a federal prosecutor who had worked on several cases involving the Family Protection Initiative. Derek, she said, I wanted you to know that the Department of Justice is considering adopting some of your investigative protocols as part of our official procedures. The comprehensive approach you've developed has been more effective than anything we've tried through traditional law enforcement channels. Derek nodded, pleased but not surprised. He had always believed that protecting families required resources and methods that went beyond what traditional law enforcement could provide. The success of his initiative had proven that comprehensive protection required comprehensive solutions. There's something else, Maria continued. We've been tracking the recidivism rates for criminals exposed through your organization's investigations. It's remarkable. We're seeing virtually zero repeat offenses among predators who have been subjected to your full investigative and legal process. Derek smiled grimly. Fear is a powerful deterrent. When predators understand that targeting families will result in complete exposure financial ruin, and maximum legal consequences, most of them find other lines of work. That evening, Derek returned home to find Lucy, now 12 years old, working on a school project about heroes and role models. She looked up as he entered her room, her expression serious but confident. "Dad," she said, "I'm writing about you for my project." Derek raised an eyebrow. "About me? I'm not sure I qualify as a hero, sweetheart." Lucy shook her head firmly. "You do. You protect families. You stop bad people from hurting kids. That makes you a hero." Derek sat on the edge of Lucy's bed, studying his daughter's earnest face. She had grown into a confident, intelligent young woman who understood the world contained both good and evil people, but who never doubted that the good people would ultimately prevail. "You know," Derek said carefully, "protecting people sometimes requires making hard choices. It means being willing to do things that other people might not understand or approve of." Lucy nodded. "I know, but protecting innocent people is always the right thing to do, even when it's hard." Derek felt a surge of pride at his daughter's wisdom. Lucy had learned from their experience not to be cynical or afraid, but to be strong and decisive when facing threats to her safety or the safety of others. "What are you going to do when you grow up?" Derek asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I want to help you," Lucy replied without hesitation. "I want to protect families too." Derek studied his daughter's determined expression and saw something of himself in her resolve. Lucy had been shaped by her early trauma, but rather than being broken by it, she had been strengthened. She understood that the world contained predators, but she also understood that those predators could be stopped by people who were willing to commit completely to protecting the innocent. "We'll see," Derek said, kissing Lucy's forehead. "For now, focus on growing up strong and smart. There will be plenty of time to decide about the future." But Derek already knew that Lucy would probably join his organization eventually. She had the same instinctive protectiveness, the same unwillingness to tolerate threats against innocent people, the same understanding that some lines could never be crossed without facing comprehensive consequences. As Derek prepared for bed that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Tiffany's betrayal had destroyed the man he had been, trusting, forgiving, willing to see the best in people. But from that destruction had emerged someone far more effective at protecting the innocent. Derek Mitchell had become exactly what families needed. Someone who understood how predators operated, who had the resources and determination to stop them, and who was willing to ensure that the consequences for threatening innocent people were severe enough to serve as permanent deterrents. The legal system provided one form of justice, but Derek had learned to provide another. Comprehensive, personal, and designed to ensure that betrayal carried a price that extended far beyond prison sentences and fines. Most importantly, Derek had created something that would outlast him. The Family Protection Initiative and the broader movement it had spawned would continue protecting families long after Derek was gone. Lucy and others like her would carry forward the understanding that protecting innocent people required complete commitment, creative thinking, and an unwavering willingness to ensure that predators face consequences that match the scope of their crimes. Derek had transformed his personal tragedy into a legacy of protection that would benefit countless families for generations to come. Tiffany and Troy had tried to destroy his life, but instead, they had created something they never could have anticipated. A man who understood both how to identify evil and how to stop it permanently. As Derek drifted off to sleep, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing his daughter was safe, his community was protected, and predators across the country now faced an opponent who would never forgive, never forget, and never stop until justice was complete and comprehensive. Derek Mitchell had become the protector he wished had existed when his family was under attack. And that made all the difference. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.